Well, good morning. It is a privilege and an honor to get to share with you what the Lord has laid on my heart with you this morning. And it's always a daunting task when this is presented. It's like pastor calls, hey, I'm going to be out of town September 24th. How'd you like to preach again? Okay. What are you going to preach on? I have no idea. But then the Lord comes in and he shows you something. And I'm going to try to share that with you today. And it's always great to see God's Spirit working, because my message for you this morning is actually bookended by my wife's favorite song that Carolyn shared with us, Be Thou My Vision, which actually fits really well with the message for today. And then the end of the sermon, when the Elder Burns comes back, and leads you through the final hymn, it'll be my favorite hymn, which is Joyful, Joyful. And by the way, that is hymn number 1 in your hymnal, not number 489. There's a change, and I'm glad to see it because that's my favorite hymn. So I titled this, Eclipsed from God's Marvels. And the text you heard was Romans 1, 18 to 23. And that text shows us the reality of the world in which we live. Society is working diligently to eclipse from our view the marvels of God. We see that constantly. And so as I went to South Carolina this past August to visit and see the total eclipse, I saw the creation in a way I'd never seen it before. I got a chance to witness something that I've always wanted to see and get to experience. And I'll be honest with you, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. And I plan to see the next one 7 years from now, Lord willing. And I can't wait. Honestly, I'm excited already, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how soon I'm allowed to make reservations. I don't know if they work 7 years out, but I'm ready now. But a couple of things became clear to me as I was witnessing that, and I was with my family. The skies didn't grow as dark as I was expecting during the process. Even as the sun was almost completely blocked, and a lot of you who stayed here in Pennsylvania probably realized it didn't really get dark. 80%, 90% of the sun was blocked, and yet the light was still extremely bright. And you can almost think of that as a metaphor for God in terms of his glory. The world may be trying to block it out, but God's glory always shines through. And I'll be honest, as I was down there, where there were clouds, and there were parts of the time that we were there, and we looked up and we couldn't see the sun at all. And we stayed and we just kept hoping and praying that we'd be able to see it, and the clouds never really cleared. But when we put our special glasses on, we could see the light coming through the sun clearly. And we could make out exactly what was happening. We could see the silhouette of the sun. We could see the shadow of the moon. Or actually, I guess it was technically the moon itself, blocking the sun. And we could see every event as it was happening clearly, as if we were beyond the clouds. And so we could see, but only when we had our special glasses on. Other than that, we looked up at the sky and we saw clouds in a bright spot. I was on the phone with my brother and my sister, and we're talking, and they're like, we need an on-the-scene report of exactly what you're seeing. And what I saw was clouds and a bright spot. And I put the glasses on, and I could see it all. I tried to take a couple of pictures for them. Didn't work at all. So it wasn't anything like I hoped it would be. And yet, it was extremely special, and it was unlike anything else. And it was even more special. I'm going to get teared up here. I'm just going to say it. Watching my son's reaction. He got so excited. I mean, he did a little DS video of the whole thing. He's looking to the south, and you can see the sun over here. And as we're standing there watching it, and as the eclipse is coming closer and closer to totality, to the north, there's these dark clouds rolling in, and thunder is all around us, and there's lightning flashes and everything else. And just watching his excitement was amazing. It was amazing. But over the weeks and over the months leading up to it, and since the eclipse, I've done a lot of research in preparing for this, and a lot of the things I read tried to add extra significance to that event. I saw flat earthers who tried to use the eclipse as proof of a flat earth. I don't know. I don't know. I also saw those who tried to use it as a prophecy towards the end times and events that would have happened yesterday, linked to it with an eclipse that's going to happen 7 years from now. But I think when you do that, you eclipse yourself from seeing the marvels of God's creation. You miss what's happening in the moment because you're looking for something else. The reality is, that was awesome, and it doesn't need anything else. It didn't need anything additionally added to it. And one of the things that we have to recognize is a total solar eclipse is not a rare event. Astronomer Dr. Danny Faulkner of Answers in Genesis estimates, and it's a rough estimate, every 18 months there is a total solar eclipse visible from somewhere on Earth. Somewhere. Not where you live, not where I live, but somewhere. Every 18 months. Solar eclipses themselves happen about every 6 months. So again, not that rare. What makes it rare is that you don't get to be where it happens all the time. But that event happens very frequently. Since 1900, 25 solar eclipses were visible from the United States. 15 of them were total eclipses. From some portion of the United States, you could see it. In the next 33 years, up to 2050, there's going to be 10 more visible from this country. Of those, 5 will be total eclipses. The best one is the one coming in 7 years, where it'll go along the coast, or actually the border between Canada and Maine, straight through and out of our country through Texas. What made this most recent one so special is the amount of the country that got to see it. From South Carolina straight all the way through Oregon. Literally 100 million plus, based on the estimates I've seen for how many people drove to get into that path. 100 million plus Americans got to witness it, in varying degrees of clouds and unclouds. Day 4 of Creation Week. You knew I had to go back to Genesis, right? Day 4 of Creation Week, God said this, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. And he made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give them light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. So when we look at Genesis 1, we recognize that the sun and the moon have a purpose. And that purpose is so we can count time. Every day, every month, every year. What we don't think about is that God can use it for other counting too. Did you know that the eclipse that we just witnessed happened 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours prior, in 1999? You know what was different? Where? That one went through vast stretches of northern Europe. It was the exact same eclipse. It was the exact same eclipse. 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours apart. By the way, the 8 hours is rough. I didn't want to give you the exact seconds and all that. But it changes latitude, it changes longitude in terms of where it's visible. But it's the same eclipse. That's called the Serous ecliptic cycle, which was figured out by the Ancient Chaldeans. The Ancient Chaldeans are the same people from Babylon. The same people who, when they looked up into the sky, witnessed a star that they hadn't seen before, that foretold the coming of the birth of Christ. And they followed that star to Bethlehem. Amen. So, we have to look at things through the right lens. We have to put our special glasses on so that we can see God's creation, God's marvels, as a way of seeing him. Because he put it here for us to be able to see him. Verse 19, Romans 1. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So we don't have the ability to say, well, I didn't know. It's there. It's clear. I've talked to a lot of people since the eclipse and before the eclipse. I've talked to people before the eclipse about what they'd seen in the past when they went to visit it. I have a lot of friends who are like amateur astronomers, have their own little telescopes and all that. But they've seen total eclipses before, but they don't believe in God. But they say, this is an event you can't miss. Why not? What's so special about it? It happens every 18 months. Why should I not miss it? What are you missing? What are you getting out of it? There's a hopelessness there, that they don't see it as a way of seeing God. But God's creation stands as a testament to who he is, of his power, of his nature. And these are the marvels of creation that we have the access to see. And I keep using that phrase, marvels of creation, because when my family and I went to the Creation Museum a few years ago, there was a book series called Marvels of Creation. And it was a chance to look at creation in a science book through God's lens. And as you look from page to page, and there was a book on reptiles, and there's a book on birds, and there's a book on mammals, there's a book on everything. Because every time you turn the page, you saw God's fingerprint. Every time you turn the page, you saw that God specially touched these creatures as they were formed. God's creation is a marvel. And I look forward to seeing the next eclipse so I can experience it all over again. 1 Corinthians 13:12 says, for now we see dimly in a mirror, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I am to be fully known. I crave that. I want to know. And that's why I study science. That's why I'm a science teacher. I want to know. Einstein, not the greatest Christian, actually not a Christian at all, but he said a very interesting thing about God. He said, studying science is a chance to think God's thoughts after him. As you study science, you get an understanding and appreciation for God and his special power to work all things in the world in a way that we just don't usually recognize. However, there's a problem. Romans 1 verses 18 starts this. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. What does it mean to suppress? To willfully push it out of sight. To willfully eclipse it from view. To obscure us from seeing the truth. Anybody here ever go to a natural science museum? Anybody here ever see any mention of God? I went to one. I went to one that did that. It's called the Creation Museum. There's another one, by the way, similar structure being built in Texas. It's a little further drive, but it'll be opening either later this year or following year. But they talk about creation. They talk about its design. They talk about the design of creation. Who designed it? Not according to them. It was designed by nature, who I've never met. It was designed by evolution, which isn't a person. They say it's designed and developed and it's been determined and it's been as if evolution had a plan. Evolution had no plan. Even if evolution were true, Just walk with me for a second there. Even if it were true, there's no plan. None. Randomness. That's all you have. A series of randomness. You are the product of a series of randomness. Doesn't that make you feel good about yourself? Flip the coin over. You are the product of a divine plan from God. God designed you. God's developed everything that you see around you. God's determined it. So we're going to do something a little different. I'm not going to stand up here the whole time. You kind of I'm sneaking down here. I just want you to look at creation a little bit today. Put your God glasses on and look through the clouds that have been placed in front of your eyes and see the reality. I tried to find some of the coolest pictures I could find, and then I realized it didn't matter if I found the coolest picture because they're all cool. When you're looking at them through God's glasses, they're all cool. So this is actually a picture of the Earth taken from the moon. Yes, we've been there. It's one of my favorites, too. I have students every now and then. Did you know we never got to the moon? I said, oh, yeah? Tell me about that. Job 26:7. He stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. The scripture, Job, one of the oldest books of the Bible, clearly states the reality of the situation. What's the earth hanging on? Emptiness. There is nothing there. That's what space is all about. Nothing. It's not about a giant turtle upon whose back the world is being carried. It's not about a big, strong guy by the name of Atlas that can magically hold it up. It's being held up by the biggest and the strongest that there is. God created it. He made it a ball. He made it a circle above the circle of the earth. He made it a three-dimensional circle, a sphere, which kind of got squished down. We'll talk about that another time. But he hangs it there. Notice there's no strings. It's not suspended by a string. It's suspended there by gravitation. God developed the way it would work. And he put the sun there, and we look at, and they talk about the Earth, the scientists talk about the Earth as like the Goldilocks planet. Where Goldilocks goes into the house of the three bears, and the first one is too hot, and the next one is too cold. The planets work the same way. If we were living on Mercury, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now because it's too hot. Venus is exactly the same way. If we went to even Mars and beyond, it would be too cold. Earth is just right. We have liquid water, we have solid water, we have gaseous water, which is actually in a very narrow band of temperature, that it can do all three things. And we, living here in Pennsylvania, get the privilege of getting to experience all three in the air. We get to feel snow, which is kind of cool. We get rain, which is really cool. And we get humidity, which is less cool. But still, it's water in the air. We get to experience all three of that living here in Pennsylvania. Some of our Liberian friends and other friends from Africa, Nigeria, do you get snow? No. Like maybe at the top of a mountain somewhere. I saw something that was like, I think it was 2009, 2008, somewhere around there. 49 out of 50 states had snow on the ground at the same time. Even Hawaii, because the mountains at the top could hold snow. You know which one didn't? Florida. There was no snow on the ground in Florida. Every other state, Texas, Georgia, California, it didn't matter. Every state except for that. Back to Genesis. I'm sorry. Genesis 1:7, God made the expanse and separated the waters, which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. It's really a shame that this picture doesn't look cooler up here, because this picture is an amazing, I mean, you have a rainbow in the beginning. It's not actually a rainbow, it's just a spectrum. But you see a dividing line between where this rain is happening and where the rain is, and you see a flat line of the cloud where it's only at that altitude that the cloud can exist. If it comes any lower than that, it becomes rain. It can hold together as a cloud above that height. But if it comes any lower, it falls as rain. God made that. There's no evolutionary way to explain this. This was God. He said, this is how it's supposed to be. But as we look at this, and as we see God's creation, we have to realize that God is not the creation. God is the creator. God is the one who made it. So as we're looking at these things through God's glasses, we have to recognize that every time we look at this, all we see is a fingerprint. We're not seeing God. We're seeing what He's left behind. We're seeing what He's created for us to see. If you think about a potter and clay, the potter has to press into the clay. And when they pull away, there's a fingerprint left behind on the clay. Now they can rub it away. Did God rub away His fingerprints? He left them there so that we could see them. And this is what the last part of our text from this morning really was talking about. Don't marvel at the creation for the sake of the creation. Marvel at the creation for the sake of the Creator. See it for what it is. Go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord. This is, it just left. This is, the guy that got taken on the chair. Elijah, thank you. This is Elijah. I don't know where it went. Elijah, this is Elijah. And it says, and behold, the Lord was passing by, and a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. God is not in the creation. We can see Him through the creation, but it's not Him. I'm going to get a little biological here for a minute. I might say some things that might not be 100% accurate on the biology side of this, but I want you to see the swarming creatures of the sea. Day 5. God created the birds of the air, the animals of the sea. Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures. God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind. Now, on the right side, you see 3 pictures. Those are 3 different animals. The top one is a flatfish. I think it's a halibut, but I don't know. The one in the middle on the right is a lionfish. And the one on the far right bottom is a sea snake. The pictures on the left are all of the same animal. That's the Mimic Octopus. The Mimic Octopus is born when it breaks out of its egg under the sea. It spends no time with its mom or its dad and just goes about its business. This creature sees the world in which it lives, recognizes the animals that live around it, and acts like them. The top picture is it creating its body and coloration to match the halibut to the right. And it doesn't just change its body shape and sit on the bottom. It swims along the bottom exactly like a halibut would, if it believes at that moment that a halibut would have a better chance of surviving than it would. So it becomes a halibut. This same creature can decide to become a lionfish, or at least its best rendition of it. And it spreads its tentacles out to try to look like the spiny fins of the lionfish. It knows, apparently, somehow, that a lionfish is poisonous and other animals don't like it. It knows that that's a safe shape to take on because the lionfish is a poisonous creature and doesn't have a whole lot in the way of natural predators because it's poisonous. And the bottom one is a sea snake. Now this one's a little trickier because, how does an animal with 8 arms or legs, whatever you prefer to call them, appendages, how does it act like a long, thin thing? It buries almost all of its body, leaves 2 tentacles sticking out, and it pretends it's a sea snake. How does it do that? How does it know? God designed it that way. It has that built into it already. This is a bird. This is also from day 5. On day 5, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. And God created every winged bird after its kind. I kind of have the feeling that God made the frigate bird first. This is a frigate bird. Frigate, Frigate, bird. Frigate, I guess. I don't know. But it's a frigate bird. And it's named after frigates, those big boats that would go out and stay on the ocean for long stretches of time. Scientists recently just did a study on this bird. They tagged them, they put the little, collars on, and all those little radio tags and everything else. They were studying this bird, and they wanted to find out some things, because they knew it could fly for a long time. What they didn't realize is how long a time it can fly. We're not talking about hours. I mean, you think about a flight across the world, 16 hours stuck in an airplane. It's not a pleasant experience. From what I understand, my longest flight ever has been 4 hours. I went to Arizona. My wife went to Ireland. She's the world traveler. So this animal does not stay aloft without touching the ground for only hours. It's not only days. It's beyond weeks. It's nearly months. They have recorded a single frigate bird staying aloft for over 56 straight days. It never landed. Not on a ship, not on over open ocean. It never touched anything except for flying. It flew for 56 straight days. Now I know what you're thinking. How did it eat? How did it eat? Well, the frigate bird has amazing eyesight. And it goes from cloud to cloud following updraft, so it doesn't have to expend a lot of energy floating around. In fact, they've done some tests on their heart rate, and they find that when they're in this position, flying, their heart rate is almost identical to the resting heart rate when they're sitting in their nest. This does not require energy from this bird. It can do this pretty much as long as it wants. How does it sleep? They don't know. They know dolphins put half their brain to sleep at a time so it can stay underwater and still breathe and all that stuff. How does this bird do it? Nobody knows. But it has to. I mean, could you imagine going without sleep for 56 straight days? I mean, you wouldn't be seeing food anymore. But what this animal does is it flies down and it watches for tuna. Not because it eats the tuna, but because it eats what the tuna eats. So it waits for schools of tuna to find a bait fish school, and as the tuna attacks it from below, the fish try to escape. The only way they can. They jump out of the water. And as the fish jump out of the water, the frigate bird swoops down and eats them. The ultimate food to go. Just comes down, grabs that fish, and just keeps on going. I'm good. Maybe it comes back and takes another round. 56 straight days. Feeds itself, does all of its other things, sleeps, 56 days aloft. I'd like to read you a poem. I'm not really a poetry guy, but I want to read you a poem by Joyce Kilmer. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her arms and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, and upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made and read by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. Does anybody know what tree this is? This is the General Sherman. You get an A+ today. This is the General Sherman. This is the largest single organism alive on Earth. That's the biggest living thing there is today. How big is it, you ask? It's not the tallest tree. It's only 275 feet tall. The next, well, actually the tallest, I don't know how many are in between, but the tallest tree is actually the Hyperion tree. It's over 100 feet taller. But this giant sequoia has the single greatest volume of any single living thing. 52,500 cubic feet. Just to give you a little sense of that, that's almost 400,000 gallons. So, think about your milk, stack them up 400,000 tall, and there you go. 400,000 gallons of volume. It's 400 feet across, so when you see that picture there, it's 400 feet at the base across. 104 feet. That's about 7 foot diameter. I'm sorry, let me get that right. I got that wrong. A branch of its tree has a 7 foot diameter. Its largest one has a branch that's 7 feet wide. It lost a branch the other day. Not the other day, but a few months ago. Just fell. Did some damage. Took out some fencing. A couple other things. It's a big branch. So, how does a tree get that big? It's easy if you live over 2,000 years. This tree is estimated, based on the tree that just fell, they did some calculating on the rings of that branch. It's calculated to be between 2,300 and 2,700 years old. So let's just put that in perspective for a minute. This tree was either 300 to 700 years old while Jesus was walking around. This tree was a sapling while the Israelites were being carried off into Babylon. That's how old this tree is. That's an old tree. Only God can make a tree. And so, I want to just finish with this. Chapter 1 of Romans 22 and 23 says, although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds, and animals, and reptiles. And I'm going to call Paul the ultimate evangelist outside of Christ. He went to Athens. Acts 17, 22 and 23 says this. Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious, because they had statues of their gods everywhere. What did they look like? People. Maybe a little bigger. Looked like people. For as I was passing through and considering the objects you worship, meaning also animals, things, I even found an altar with this inscription, and there was nothing on that altar. To the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. And Paul then goes on to give them a sermon. He didn't have the ability to draw on their understanding of the law. He didn't have the history of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob to draw on. What did he have? The world in which they have lived. And so he starts, God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men. And I took a little bit out so it would fit. So that they should seek the Lord. Why should we seek the Lord? For in him we live and we move and we have our being. Elizabeth. Thanks. So, where does that leave us? Where does that leave us? It leaves us in this place. We need to remember the God of the universe. We need to remember that he's the author of everything that we can hear, see, smell, taste, touch. Let's look for his fingerprints. Let's try to find him in everything that he's created. They're around us. They're everywhere. They're the miracles of the mundane. And I used that phrase, and I was wondering what my wife thought of it. She goes, well, mundane's not really interesting. That's kind of the point. A bird's not interesting until you look at it closer. An octopus. We've all seen octopuses. It's not really interesting until you look at it closer. A cloud isn't that interesting until you study meteorology. All of a sudden, it makes you want to change your major. I say that because I know some people who have, and they did. But they all point to the nature and character of who God is. And if we take the time to study those minute little things that don't seem that interesting, we'll get to know God in a whole different way. And so that is my message for you this morning. That's what I have for you. Brother?